Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss Keir Starmer's focus on immigration, and when I say immigration I really mean asylum, in terms of an electoral strategy which some are describing as a way to avoid the mistakes the Democrats made in the election this month, but I think has more to it than that. I think it's a way to take away all the Tories' toys. But first, for daily political commentary, please click the subscribe button so you don't miss out. So just very briefly, concerning the US elections, there are two major factors sort of emerging as being responsible for the Democrats' defeat. The first was being the victim of an anti-incumbency wave. Analysts have pointed out that over the past year or so, almost every government that's gone to the polls in anything like free and fair elections has either lost, such as in the USA and Poland, or dramatically lost the strength of their power, such as, say, France and India. There have been a small number of exceptions, but only a very small number. What is less clear is the exact cause. Is it just governments who presided over the high inflation that followed COVID and the invasion of Ukraine? Or is it a genuine anti-incumbency feeling where voters around the world are just not going to give lots of time to governments who don't appear to be getting busy making their lives better? Either way, this should be less of a threat to Labour as long as their plans work out as they're expecting. But it's still going to be a concern. But the second lesson from the US election was this. These are how Americans judge the importance of various issues. For economy, remember, it's likely those voters are thinking about their own personal bank balance rather than GDP, because actually American GDP growth was like the best in the world recently in terms of advanced economies. Certainly Labour think as well that when voters say economy, they mean how it affects them. So, and so much so that they've dialed down the rhetoric on GDP and they're focusing now on how people feel, being the metric. Starmer explicitly said as much in PMQs a couple of weeks ago. And you look at all the issues where over 50% of all American voters thought it was a top issue, and you can see how Trump hit most of them. But Harris only really went big on abortion. The lesson is surely to use voters' top concerns as your guide for what your loudest policies should be. Not that this is a new lesson. I've been saying this for some years. Although parties have lots of policies, the one they shout the loudest about are those which appeal most to target voters. Or at least that's what they do if they want to win. So now let's look at what the top issues were for UK voters at the election this year. Cost of living, health, the economy in general, and immigration and asylum. After that, the issues drop off a cliff in terms of importance. Now, if you looked at the top policies Labour were pushing during the election, you'll see that all of the top ones are covered in their first 6 steps. And that brings me on to how Labour are framing immigration and asylum, with all the emphasis on asylum. So before I go over what Labour are doing and why, let's cover the facts first. First fact is that the level of asylum in the UK is actually really very small. It's much smaller than for many other European countries, but has been blown out of all proportion in the media and by the right wing, who want to use the issue as a distraction to persuade the rest of us to vote away our own rights in the belief we're doing it to be shitty to foreigners. They did it with Brexit. They're now trying to do it with the European Convention on Human Rights. Another fact is that the only way to prevent small boat crossings by asylum seekers is set up safe routes for reclaiming asylum, at least in northern France. Finally, as a result of climate change and political instability, which the world at large is doing very little about, there are going to be more regions which are not safe to live in. And if a region's not safe to live in and people currently live there, the number of refugees is going to keep increasing. And one of the more irritating features for me, the very people who complain the loudest about asylum also support all the things which create large numbers of refugees around the world. Like, I would mind less if they were at least supporting moves to tackle climate change and promote peace and responsible governments. So when you look at Labour's rhetoric on immigration, it seems as out of touch with reality as anything in the mainstream media. They are also talking very loudly about asylum and as little as possible about economic migration. In terms of actions, they are happy to talk about smashing the gangs, the deportations they've been carrying out, all legal and above board, and now paying other countries to deal with asylum seekers before they get to the UK. What you won't catch them doing is talking about the safe routes which must be established for the genuine refugees who aren't diverted before they get to the Channel, You also won't hear them explaining how they intend to reduce economic migration for a country with a falling birth rate, but still wants the economy to grow. So what's this all about? Some are saying it's about not making the same mistake as the Democrats, who ignored how important immigration was. Now, you can look at that poll and see how polarising it was. Only 39% of Harris voters thought it was a top issue, but 82% of Trump voters did. So you think, well, so wasn't Harris right not to make a big song and dance about immigration then? No, because she lost. In order to win, she needed to win some of the votes, which ended up going to Trump, and 82% of them thought it was a top issue. And you can see something similar with UK polling. Break it down by vote. Only 10% of people who voted Labour this year thought immigration asylum was a top issue, compared to 45% of Tory voters and 82% of Reform UK voters. Interestingly, exactly the same proportion as Trump voters. But therein lies the real reason Labour and Starmer personally are putting so much emphasis on it. As a way of retaining the voters who voted for them in this election, complete waste of time. But as a way of countering both the Tories and Reform UK, who are their major opponents in the vast majority of seats, it can act to cut the legs from under them. Labour only have to persuade a small number of Tory and Reform voters that they are delivering, including on this top issue for them, and that massively increases their chance of winning the next election. Consider that Labour already beat Reform UK and the Tories in more than enough seats to give them a huge majority. So nibbling away a bit of their support solidifies those results, and if it works, allows them then to focus on some of the trickier constituencies at the next election. So the question is, will it work? Well, it might. There might be some evidence that it could in replies to a GB News post on Twitter. The article was about how Starmer had organised 3 record-breaking deportation flights with nearly 10,000 migrants deported since the election. For reference, just under 4,000 migrants were deported in the whole of 2023. And all without courts telling them it's illegal, because, of course, if you process asylum claims properly, then, well, people will fail that process and then you're free to deport anyone who's not successful as long as you followed the law. So for those whom this sort of thing appeals to, it challenges some of their ideas about Labour. And the replies were quite illuminating. There were lots of people that you would imagine are like Reform UK supporting types, refusing to believe it. There were some beauties in the comments, a couple of early ones. One of them asked, where to? Like they care where they've been deported to. They're not in Britain. Next one, we need to see proof, flight records, who was deported, where to? Otherwise, this is bullshit. And there were plenty of other comments which were variations on the themes of that disbelief. I mean, look at what they were doing. They were refusing to believe, not the government, but GB News, because it just didn't fit with what they'd been told. Notice that they weren't saying, yeah, well, you know, the Conservatives or Reform UK, whichever's their pick, would still do better in government. Oh, yeah, they might be deporting some, but our choice of government would do better. Now, they weren't doing that. They had to fall back on not believing it. So you ask yourself, why? Why did they have to fall back on not believing it? Because they didn't want to. What happens to those who read or watch GB News saying this and accept it as a fact? They're getting what they want. That's why these people had to fall back on disbelief. They don't believe that Labour are delivering what they think they want. And if Labour also deliver on other things that actually really matter, wage growth, easier access to healthcare, preferably social care as well, better transport, better housing, then you can see how Labour are trying to make sure there are as few possible reasons to vote either Reform or Conservative as possible. And you may say, well, they're not going to get the vast majority of Reform or Tory voters. They don't need to. A few percent will do. They already won. Labour already beat them. A few more percent just makes it more comfortable and allows Labour to lose a few votes from people who are dissatisfied with the way it's panned out. In fact, for the Conservatives in particular, you think, where do they really go from here? This is what I mean about taking their toys away from us. Like, they like to bang on about immigration and deporting people, right? But it's like, now they can't because Labour are deporting more than they did. Oh, we'll deport more. It's like, well, you've got a record. That's what actually happened. And then this is what we did. They can't bang the economy drum. if people feel their standard of living improving by the next election, because they felt it only get worse under the Tories. They can't bang the law and order drum if prisons are fixed and policing is boosted. All they'll have left is tax cuts. And will people really believe them on that either? And all the time, on top of all of this, a greater proportion of Tory voters especially are succumbing to old age than for other parties and not being replaced by younger generations. At least Reform UK, I mean, they heavily lean on the older voters as well, but they're appealing to some of the younger generation, particularly young men. Tories are not. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can join for memberships. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.